Our first respondent is Celia Jackson. Ms. Jackson is a 1973 graduate of Mesmer High School and a 1977 graduate of Hampton University, formerly Hampton Institute, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science. In 1980, she graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School, earning her Juris Doctorate degree. As an attorney, she has worked as a prosecuting attorney and managed her own law firm for over 10 years. She served also as assistant dean at Marquette University Law School and has been an instructor at the undergraduate and graduate levels. In 1998, she moved from the practice of law to the work of social justice, working in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, where she directed the Office for Black Catholic Ministry and then served as a cabinet member of the Archbishop as the Episcopal Delegate for Community Services. She represented the Archbishop on many Catholic and interfaith community-based organizations, including the USCCB's International and Policy Committee. In 2011, she was appointed as the Executive Director of the International and Intercultural Center at Alverno College, just down the street. She oversaw the study abroad, international exchange, and cultural education programs at the college. While there, she taught intro to peacemaking circles, ethics in the community psychology master's program, and women in leadership within the School of Business. Celia is currently retired and the mother of 2 adult children. She's a member of All Saints Catholic Church. She's served on many community boards over the years, including, and this is a really long and impressive list, the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, the St. Charles Youth and Family Services, Benedict Center, Rosalie Manor, All Saints Parish Council and Human Concerns Commission, Kids Forward, Casa Romero, and the Wisconsin Black Lawyers Association. She currently serves on the board of Wisconsin Community Services and was a member of the steering committee for the Black Catholic Pastoral Plan here in the Arch. Please join me in welcoming Celia Jackson.
Thank you, thank you. It's always hard to listen to the litany of things that you've done in your life. You never think you're going to live that long when you're young and rambunctious. So thank you for that very generous introduction. Good afternoon. I want to say it's an honor and a privilege and pleasure to be here. And so I want to thank Sacred Heart for this invitation to speak here today on the canonization of Father Augustus Tolton. You know, it's so interesting being here on the dais with Bishop Perry because many years ago, he was the pastor of my parish. And I am mindful that when he first came to All Saints and I was a parishioner there, that was the first time I had met a Black priest. That was the first time I had a Black pastor. I am a cradle Catholic, having attended school in most of my formative years in New Jersey, and then my family moved to Milwaukee in the late 60s, and I went to what was the former St. Agnes and on to Mesmer High School. And during that entire time of my formation, I had not encountered any Black religious priests or sisters. I have to say that even though 100 years had passed since Father Tolton had been ordained, we still have a shortage of Black priests. And so many of the challenges facing the church today, including a clergy that partially reflects its members, are reminiscent of the past. Now, when I looked at Bishop Perry's comments, his keynote speech, one of the first things that stood out to me was he described Father Tolton as a patron saint of inclusion. So there are a couple of things I want to say about that. One, I would describe Father Tolton as a patron saint of perseverance for all of the exclusion and ridicule he endured. Or maybe you could say he's a patron saint of devotion for his steadfast commitment to God, to the people he served, and his tireless witness to serve and do God's will, even at his own demise. You could even say he was the patron saint of courage, for his Herculean strength it took to be the first one declared of African descent in the priesthood in the United States. Or another way, a patron saint of obedience, for he knowingly drank the cup of suffering throughout his journey to the priesthood and while he served both in Quincy and Chicago. You could go so far as to say he's the patron saint of humility, always giving with a full heart, pride and ego never being part of his demeanor. Yes, we could call him the patron saint of many, many different virtues. And yet, there is an irony. To be described as a patron saint of inclusion in a church and society that did not include him. It is so disheartening to imagine the incredible hardships he sustained simply because he wanted to serve God and minister to those in need of spiritual direction. But I do agree, he was indeed ahead of his time. Bishop Perry describes that the church was unable or timid to puncture the racial boundaries during that time and era. Now, I'm a lawyer, not a canon lawyer. So the lawyer in me would describe it quite differently. I was trained in a system that's adversarial, one that's always challenging, one that's always living in the land of right and wrong. It's either one way or another, taking people down in order to achieve a favorable result for a client. Always a win-lose. I have learned in time that there's a major cost in that point of view, and I've learned the hard way to unlearn a confrontational and adversarial way, especially in the church. At some point, I've had to acknowledge that most often in times of stress and duress, the argumentative side comes out before the pastoral side does. And I will say that these experiences are accompanied by some of the inequities that I've experienced in the Catholic Church. This combination of training and life experience would have me describe the church's posture quite differently. When one looks at the church during the time of Reconstruction and beyond, choices were made to exclude the people of African descent from ministry and to invest time and resources in immigrant communities. Blacks were shunned and considered outcasts. There were minimal resources available to them through the church. And for those that did attempt to educate and embrace the Black community, they were in turn snubbed. Consequently, they chose to go along with the status quo. Some saw this choice as a lost opportunity for the evangelization of a large segment of the Black population, a residual that remains today. Another example of how the seeds of disparity were sowed and nurtured centuries ago, leaving the remnants of a divided church and community even today. It is illustrated by how so many church people of African descent in the United States today, while Christian, belong to Protestant denominations. I guess I would describe the failure to stand up for these injustices and inconsistencies with our Catholic faith as being inconsistent with the life of Jesus Christ. Jesus, who befriended the leper, befriended the beggar, befriended the Samaritan woman, and many others who had been an outcast in society. How can the church say that it follows the Christ-like way of being when it is not practicing what it preaches? That is something for us to ponder. I do wholeheartedly agree, though, with Bishop Perry's description that Cardinal Simeoni, who sent Father Tolton back to the United States after his ordination, that he sent him back to be nailed to a cross. The Cardinal insisted that America needed a Black priest, and a country that claimed to be an enlightened nation deserved that honor. Instead, he totally miscalculated the extent of the environment he was sending Father Tolton into and sent him back to embark on a journey of woe and strife. Nailed to the cross. What imagery. What a powerful description of Father Tolton's experience. In reading a book on his life, From a Slave to a Priest, when he learned the news that he was being sent back to America, he is described as going to pray and asking God, "Can I drink the cup?" That is the cup of suffering. He asked himself and God, "Can I go back to a place that had me enslaved, where I was not wanted, where no seminary would accept me for religious instruction?" And he prayed. It is such a palpable metaphor of the inquiry that Jesus asked of his Father when he knew of his impending death and crucifixion. And as an obedient son, he did his Father's will. And as Father Tolton prayed and asked the question of returning to the United States, he too was obedient and said, "Yes, I can drink the cup." The symbolism for me is so incredibly powerful. Little did the cardinal know that he was placing him in the lion's den to be a martyr amongst his own fellow priests and practicing Catholics. Now, I want to acknowledge there were some clergy and religious sisters that were supportive of Father Tolton. They helped him with his formative education, provided support, sought out religious instruction, provided some financial support, and were certainly very present for him. But the systemic racism and injustices were and are so deeply woven into the fabric of mainstream society that it requires more than goodwill to break free. His mother knew. She was an instrumental force in his life. She braved the dangerous waters of the Mississippi River with 3 young children, including an infant, to get from slave country in Missouri to free country in Illinois. She was a source of inspiration throughout his life and provided him with the soundest advice that guided him through the many obstacles he faced. She reminded him that he must never forget the goodness of the Lord and to ask the Lord to take care of him always. She also told him that the goodness of the Lord endures forever. I truly believe these messages from his mother were foundational in his devotion and obedience to the Lord. God took good care of his family when crossing the river and enabled them to survive the cruelty of slavery. And although they endured a very hard life, both in Quincy and Chicago, it certainly was not bondage. Someone that comes to mind during this era is Harriet Tubman. Activist, heroine, freedom fighter, conductor of the Underground Railroad, who was alive during this time. Father Tolton and his family received reprieve when arriving in Quincy due to the secret passage of the Underground Railroad in that city. Harriet, too, was a woman of strong faith and is noted for saying, "I said to the Lord, I'm going to hold steady, and I'm going to hold steady onto you, and I know that you'll see me through." And he did. I agree with Bishop Perry that Father Tolton did indeed carry a heavy burden. He exhibited all the signs of sainthood. He served the church, his parishioners, the people, and the Lord with a zeal and faithfulness that never betrayed the pain and hurt he carried in his soul and spirit. His love for the church and God is undeniable. And as Pope Francis says, a love that transcends barriers. Oh, how I wish I could say that. That my love for the church transcends barriers, that I am willing to rise above a history that people that look like me did not matter. If I'm being honest, I don't even know if I can. At best, I can describe it as an internal battle to fight against what is wrong and do my best to not judge and treat my neighbor any different than I would want to be treated. But admittedly, that is a very tall order. So I pray for guidance, patience, and fortitude to stay strong in those instances where the disparities remain. It is sometimes so easier said than done. We all have a litany of stories, experiences, and laws that affirm that Black lives have not mattered. And we are witnessing them play out today in shootings by law enforcement, voter suppression, hate crimes, and systemic disparities that exist in every institution. We have such a long way to go. I agree with Bishop Perry that society seems comfortable with people of color being marginalized. It will require one breaking out of their comfort zone to begin to break down these barriers. In actuality, it's going to require something radical. He asked, how do we invoke empathy, a deeper understanding of community, without chastising whiteness? That is an excellent question. It is certainly very complicated. But then, as human beings, we always make things more complicated than they need to be. The answers are usually right there in front of us. We just have things like fear, pride, ambition, and greed that get in the way. Things that are so much a part of the human condition. I assert that to begin to break the histories intransigence as described by Bishop Perry, there needs to be a reckoning. The reckoning lives in the realm of ownership, authenticity, and inclusivity. And ownership of the history and complicit role of the church. That complicit role being their role in slavery. An authentic acknowledgement of the role the Catholic Church had in the treatment of Black people, going all the way back to the Papal Bull of 1452 that gave Spain and Portugal permission to invade, capture, and enslave people, to the Second Plenary Council of 1866, which focused on the newly Eastern European immigrants and excluded the newly freed people who were enslaved. These actions provided a framework that marginalized people of African descent consistent within the church and in tandem with the segregation in emerging Jim Crow laws. The other thing I would argue is inclusivity, not in a patronizing way, but with a voice and a seat at the table where voices can be heard and acknowledged without being marginalized for having a different point of view. Engaging in a process that is equitable and sheds the dominant perspective and accepts all in a just, moral, and honorable way. Too many times we are given symbolic positions that have no real power, only to give the impression that we have made progress. The reckoning begins with an apology, a bona fide, palpable, authentic, sorrowful apology, one that decries justification and explanation, one that transcends rationalization due to the time and error, one that is simply honest and wholehearted. I found it very disheartening that we did not see evidence of some of these things in the most recent pastoral on racism, Open Wide Our Hearts. It just occurred to me that we as Black people were still separated. So when we say open wide our hearts, who was the our? When we look at earlier pastorals such as Brothers and Sisters to Us, who is the us? This language and these messages still maintain a separation. It is this posture that keeps our challenge of solidarity and equity at bay. One of the things that stood out for me about Father Tolton is that he was described as a colored priest or Negro. as if this was some type of dastardly designation as opposed to being just another human being. Those descriptions, wittingly or unwittingly, live with us for all time because of the exclusions Blacks have sought to have their own. In a way, this crystallizes the divide, anchoring us always to make these distinctions between each other. We all participated with our use of language, often not intending to divide, but ultimately doing so. Now, I know I've kind of painted a picture of the glass being half full or half empty. I guess I want to make a case for it being half full. And this goes to the heart of the work that you do here in the seminary. We have a big hill to climb. So often it is hard to know how to approach it. Just recently this week, an article in the New York Times, there was a story about the Jesuits out of Georgetown that have raised $100 million to atone for slavery. It's a form of reparations, a way to repair the harm. They described it as an opportunity for truth and reconciliation. The monies will be placed in a foundation in partnership with some of the descendants of enslaved people once owned by the Jesuits going back to 1838. It's one of the largest financial commitments to heal the wounds of slavery. The monies will be used to benefit descendants of slaves once owned by the order and to provide the funding for this type of conciliation. It opens the door. It yields the possibility of hope. And this is what I want to assert to you, that we have to hold on to hope. That is how we've gotten from where we were to where we are now. And we know we still have so much further to go, but we must always hold on to hope. Hope beckons us to step into the unknown without a clear understanding of the result. Hope offers us a chance to shed all we've been holding on to and walking through the fire, fearing not the pain. Hope empowers us to transcend our limitations. For me, in essence, it is the power of the resurrection. The belief that Jesus died for our sins and was resurrected so that we could start anew. It is this hope, faith, and love that we call upon to sustain us for the forgiveness of those sins, those we have done by commission and those we have done by omission. There's so much more I can say about Father Augustus Tolton, so I will conclude with this. He has all the attributes of a saint. He is a source of inspiration and a beacon of hope. I am thankful that the Archdiocese of Chicago is leading the way for his sainthood. I'm especially inspired by the journey of Bishop Perry, who has dutifully taken on the charge. I've sat and watched some of his videos where he describes the spiritual connection he has made with Father Tolton and that he prays to him every day. Father Tolton's story is a heartbreaking one, and yet it is a victorious one. He probably did more in his 11 years as a priest and arguably accomplished so much more than some priests may do in a lifetime. We stand on his shoulders as a testament of faith, love, devotion, patience, endurance, kindness, and reverence. I invite you to join in a daily prayer for the next sign of life-saving miracle towards the quest for his sainthood. He is a model for all of us in our pursuit to truly be a universal church. He is a model of what it means to be in solidarity with one another. Despite our race and all of the other distinctions that we make that separate us from one another. And so as I conclude, I will leave you these words from the poet laureate who captured the hearts of everyone on Inauguration Day this past January, Amanda Gorman, a young Black Catholic. She says at the end of her poem, The Hill We Climb, when day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn balloons as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you, Father Augustus Tolton, for being the brave light that has been the secret to set us free. We carry the spirit of your strength with us in our hearts and pray that your light will shine with modern day saints such as Mother Teresa, Sister Catherine Drexel, Sister Josephine Bakhita, and so many others. We are forever in your debt for your strength, for your love, and for your endurance. Let the church say, amen.
Thank you so much. Our second respondent this afternoon is Dr. Paul Monson, whom some of us may know. Dr. Monson is the assistant professor of church history here at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology. He joined the faculty in 2016 after serving 2 years as a visiting assistant professor of theological studies at Loyola Marymount in LA. This transition was in fact a homecoming to Milwaukee, where he studied historical theology at Marquette University from 2007 to 2014. There he earned a master's in theology and a doctorate in religious studies, defending a dissertation on the transatlantic adaptation of the rule of Saint Benedict for American evangelization. His research specializes in US Catholic history and thought with over a dozen journal articles and book chapters. He's currently writing a book that I can't wait to read, titled Sitting Bull's Monk, which explores the transformation of a Catholic missionary through indigenous agency. Dr. Monson is a native of North Dakota, alumnus of the Catholic Studies program at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. He resides here with his wife, Stephanie, not here at the seminary, but here nearby, with his wife, Stephanie, and their 2 daughters in Wauwatosa, where Dr. Monson also serves on the Pastoral Council of St. Joseph's Catholic Church. After returning from his sabbatical in the fall, he will assume the role of academic dean here in January of 2022. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Monson.
So good afternoon. First, an apology to those gentlemen who will have me at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. You get to hear me twice within 24 hours. But first, thank you, Celia, for a lovely response. Pleasure to meet you. And thank you to Bishop Perry for a wonderful keynote this morning. And thank you to Sacred Heart for trusting me with the microphone. In 1954, exactly 100 years after the birth of Father Augustus Tolton, a Swiss abbot arrived in southern Indiana for the centennial celebration of St. Meinrad Archabbey. The abbot came from St. Meinrad's mother house, the renowned Abbey of Maria Einsiedeln, home to a medieval Schwarz Madonna, or Black Madonna, one that had attracted pilgrims across Europe for centuries. With him, the Swiss abbot brought an exact replica of this Black Madonna. Upon its presentation to the American community, he placed the statue in the hands of the only Black monk of St. Meinrad, adding the comment, "Now there are 2 of you." This young monk was Father Cyprian Davis, known by many here as the great historian of Black Catholics in the United States. Although the abbot's gesture might strike us today as a little paternalistic, there is no indication that Father Cyprian ever took offense. For if there were only going to be 2 of them in the abbey, The Blessed Mother was fine company. This very statue replaced a white-skinned Madonna that had graced the Abbey chapel for decades and reflected a conscious decision, according to some, not to introduce a black Madonna so close to the Mason-Dixie line. The Swiss abbot's ostensible agenda was to remind his American confreres that their spiritual, historical, and ecclesial identity extended well beyond the segregated landscape of mid-century America. After all, 1954 was also the year of Brown versus Board of Education, a salvo against segregation in state schools, and a ruling that some Catholics not only demurred, but even ignored, considering their schools exempt. I begin with this historical example because the cause for Father Augustus Tolton's canonization is first and foremost a historical matter. Canonization is an act of memory on the part of the Church, an act that informs her story, her mission, and even her art. Indeed, one searches almost in vain for the memory of Black Catholics in the stained glass, marble statuary, and celestial mosaics that adorn the great sanctuaries of American Catholics. And this omission has an inescapable history, a Catholic history, reflected in the very life of a man affectionately known as Father Gus. It was a Catholic family that owned Father Gus's mother, Martha, and decided to painfully separate her from her family in Kentucky upon the marriage of a white daughter. This is before Father Gus was even born. It was a Catholic justice of the Supreme Court who penned the infamous Dred Scott decision denying citizenship to free Blacks. Father Gus was only 4 at the time. On the eve of the Civil War, it was a Catholic handbook of moral theology used in American seminaries well into the 19th century that refused to trouble consciences about slavery, endorsing its endurance. It was a Catholic bishop who, shortly after the outbreak of the war, defended slavery as a, quote, eminently Christian work in its ability to enlighten the, quote, race of Canaan from an intellect of the blackest type. Father Gus was 7. It was Catholic immigrant workers in New York City, mostly Irish, who rioted against conscription for the Union while lynching and murdering Blacks who, they presumed, were now going to take their jobs after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Father Gus was only 9 and escaped from Missouri to the free state of Illinois. The following year, it was another Catholic bishop who officially represented the cause of the Confederacy in Europe. After the war, it was the first Catholic university of the United States that refused to admit freed Blacks, while its Jesuit president refused to acknowledge the secret heritage of his enslaved mother, even though he, along with his 2 brothers, the Healy brothers, were the first African Americans ordained to the priesthood in the United States. Such was the shame of African roots. Father Gus was 20 at the time, and as he sought further education, seminary doors remained closed to him, for he could not hide his racial heritage. It was a Catholic priest who racially harassed and demonized Father Gus when he returned to Quincy, to the point that he sought a new chapter in Chicago. That this priest's name, Weiss or Weiss, is likely a contraction of the German word for white, only adds drama to Father Gus's saga. Father Gus was 32 at the time of his ordination and return, what some might call a late vocation, certainly then, and yet a fellow priest treated him like a child. And to add insult to injury, it was a Catholic Black man from Louisiana who was the losing plaintiff in Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court decision confirming separate but equal as the law of the land. Father Gus was 42, just 1 year before his sudden death. But these events form only one side of Father Gus's life and Catholic history. It was a network of Catholic priests, both Irish and German, who fostered his vocation first as a boy, then as a catechist, and finally as a seminarian. It was 2 Catholic religious communities who assisted Father Gus in his education, first in the form of a free Catholic school for Blacks, and then via admission to the local Catholic college, despite the protests of other Catholics. It was the Catholic laity, both Black and white, who filled the pews of Father Gus's first assignment, St. Joseph's Negro Parish, and who supported the parish financially, prompting the jealousy and racial slurs of Father Weiss at St. Boniface down the street. It was a Catholic bishop who wrote the Urbanum in Rome on behalf of the young Father Gus after American seminaries had turned him away. And it was a Catholic cardinal who welcomed Father Gus to Rome, supported his formation, and sent him back to the United States to bear the light of Christ in a land that claimed the torch of liberty. And here we see the marks of solidarity through the memory of Father Gus. One of the priests who nurtured Father Gus's vocation, Father John Jansen, went on to become the first bishop of the Diocese of Belleville, a longtime sponsor of this seminary, as we see present in this room with Robert Dodson and Luke Fitzgerald. It was Father Jansen who ensured that Father Gus's first Mass in Quincy was at St. Boniface, the same parish that had chased his mother and family away shortly after their arrival. The sisters who staffed the free school for Blacks in Quincy were from the School Sisters of Notre Dame Convent right here in Milwaukee. The German Franciscans who supported Father Gus and admitted him to their college also built and until last year staffed St. Francis Solanus Church in downtown Quincy, which happens to be the first pastoral assignment of our recent graduate from the Springfield Diocese, Father Dave Beagles. The very church edifice that Father Dave now calls home would have been brand new upon Father Gus's return to Quincy. And it is one of the few Catholic structures left in Quincy that Father Gus would recognize today. And one of Father Gus's dearest friends, Catholic friends, from his days in Chicago, Lincoln Vall, went on to establish the first Black Catholic parish here in Milwaukee, St. Benedict the Moor, a parish that endures to this day. But here, memory's fertile common ground also unearths embarrassments. In Quincy, both St. Peter, the parish of Father Gus's youth, and St. Boniface, the site of his first hometown Mass, disappeared with a tornado in the 1940s. Only St. Boniface was rebuilt on the original site, only to be closed in 2007, now standing empty. And Father Gus's first pastoral assignment, St. Joseph's, is long gone, sold off in 1892, not even 3 years after Father Gus left his hometown for Chicago. And what of his parish in Chicago, St. Monica's, a humble parish that defied the segregated norm of its day? A more famous name, later to become Chicago's first cardinal, redefined St. Monica's as an exclusively Black parish 10 years after Father Gus's death, and the same cardinal eventually closed the parish. The structure Father Gus had tirelessly collected funds to build was torn down 20 years later, about the same time a tornado in Quincy destroyed the parishes associated with his life. Today, sleek condominiums occupy St. Monica's old site, surrounded by altars dedicated to American consumerism. But lest we, here in Wisconsin, be accused of pointing self-righteous fingers at our brethren to the south, let's come to terms with the most uncomfortable memory we'd rather forget. If Father Gus was indeed rejected by all 18 seminaries that existed in the United States at the time, and then only because of his race, since his bishop had publicly stated his financial support for any seminary, then our beloved St. Francis de Sales Seminary was likely on that list, especially with its connection to the German Franciscans who wrote on Father Gus's behalf. In his history of the Archdiocese, Father Stephen Avella confirms, as you've heard from Bishop Perry, that St. Francis de Sales did not welcome Black seminarians until the 1950s. This is an uncomfortable but inescapable memory for all Catholics here in Milwaukee, and practically every person in this room has benefited from the venerable history and spiritual vitality of St. Francis de Sales Seminary. But the beautiful thing about memories is that they arrest amnesia. In Father Gus's hometown for the past few years, local Catholics join in an annual procession to his gravesite, something rather new. Now a prominent sign sits under the modern bell tower of shuttered St. Boniface, announcing with pride to the passing eye that it once hosted Father Gus's first Mass, while also asking for his intercession. In Chicago, where the late Cardinal George initiated his cause for canonization during the Year of the Priest in 2010, the Archdiocese aggressively promotes the legacy of Father Gus with its own mitred ambassador, Bishop Perry. And this ambassador of Father Gus is, in fact, not only a graduate of St. Francis de Sales Seminary, but also the first African-American priest ordained for our archdiocese. But let's face it, no one likes to be accused of amnesia. And some might dismiss these memories as political machinations, a canonization cause gaining momentum after recent events. The historian's response? Of course it's political. Bishop Perry has reminded us that Father Gus's cause is not designed to chastise whiteness, and that is true. But I, at least, as a descendant of German and Irish Catholics, hence the tie, on this St. Patrick's Day, no less, welcome a little chastisement of white memory. For its chastisement, via the process of canonization, has a veritable tradition in the Church's history. As Father Cyprian reminds us in his history, the three saints most associated with Black Catholicism were raised to the altars to chide the amnesia of white Catholics. The namesake of Milwaukee's oldest Black parish, the one established by Father Gus's friend, Lincoln Ball, is St. Benedict the Moor. St. Benedict was a 16th century freed slave in Sicily who lived a life of unbounded charity. Although famous in his day throughout Italy, he was not canonized until 1807 by Pius VII, an act directed at the revival of slavery in Napoleon's empire. St. Peter Claver, the Jesuit namesake of the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver, was not canonized until 1888 by Pope Leo XIII, the same year that papal prodding had finally convinced Brazil, a land home to more Catholics than any other nation, to finally outlaw slavery. Brazil was the last nation to do so. And then there is St. Martin de Porres, perhaps the most iconic of the Church's Black saints. This famous Dominican lay brother, a hero of the streets of 17th century Lima, was denied ordination because of the laws of the Spanish Empire, which worried that the mixing of races would taint respect for the clergy. He is now not only respected, but revered in the Catholic pantheon. But we forget, Father Cyprian reminds us, that Martin remained forgotten until Gregory XVI beatified him in 1837, 2 years before the same popes condemned the slave trade, a condemnation ignored by Catholics in the American South. And it was not until 1962 that Pope St. John XXIII canonized Martin de Porres during the American presidency of an Irish Catholic, and partly in response to the public escalation of racial tensions in the United States. Pope John was simply following papal precedent. And it is in this papal prerogative to revive our memory that one discovers the greatest lesson from Father Gus's priestly life, a transatlantic lesson. Technically, Father Gus was neither a priest of the Diocese of Alton, now Springfield, nor of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Although these dioceses provided key settings for Father Gus's life and are currently collaborating towards his canonization, Father Gus was actually a priest of the Vatican's Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith, known as Propaganda Fide, which maintained jurisdiction over the US Catholic Church until 1908. By virtue of his education at the Urbanum, Propaganda Fide's Roman College, founded for missionary efforts and the only seminary to admit him, Father Gus became a Roman missionary sent back to America. He was ordained in the Lateran Basilica, the Pope's Cathedral in Rome. His first Mass, on Easter Sunday no less, was celebrated at the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, directly over the bones of the fishermen and under the dazzling dome of Michelangelo and the Baroque baldacchino of Bernini. When he returned, the majority of his correspondence is addressed neither to Alton nor Chicago, but rather to Rome. His priestly formation was a transatlantic affair. His priestly vocation was a transatlantic affair. And his priestly canonization, by definition, is a transatlantic affair. And it's worth pointing out that no native-born priest has yet to be canonized for the United States. In U.S. Catholic historiography, the term transatlantic typically applies to European immigration, the ancestors of many in this room, myself included. Its focus is on the North Atlantic, not the South. Blind to one of the darkest chapters of history, the transatlantic slave trade that brought Father Gus's ancestors to this continent. 15 years before Father Gus's birth, Pope Gregory XVI, the same pope who established the Diocese of Milwaukee and Chicago, explicitly condemned this transatlantic trade. But Gregory XVI was an unlikely candidate. He also condemned railroads, and no one took him as a sign of progress. But as Father Cyprian points out in his history, Gregory XVI had spent much of his career in propaganda fide, where he saw how slavery's inhumanity impeded evangelization and scarred the church. And thus, this is no accident that the only college to accept Father Gus was the Urbanum, the College of Propaganda Fide. And here we might discern something of a felix culpa in the rejection of Father Gus by American seminaries on this continent. In Rome, Father Gus discovered a truly global church, not confined to any one continent. His fellow seminarians came from every place imaginable, and he witnessed a universal church that undermined the culture of American segregation. He returned to America as a prophetic voice, a witness to the reality of American seminaries today, in this century, at least seminaries like Sacred Heart and St. Francis de Sales. For our seminaries and priests, or seminarians and priests, reflect not only a transatlantic church, but also a trans-Pacific, trans-hemispheric church, filled with vocations that reflect a universal church and define the future of American Catholicism. And these very individuals further mirror, as we should add, the very vision of Father Gus's contemporary, also a venerable, Father Leo John Dehon. So, dear seminarians, embrace Father Gus, not as someone else's saint, but as your own. But do not embrace him merely for historical, political, or prophetic reasons. For the best reason is personal. As Bishop Perry has stated, the example of Father Gus is one in which holiness arises from his perseverance. And this is why it is fitting that his call stems from the year of the priest. Because when one considers Father Gus's story, his life was not only one of perseverance, but also one of foolishness, at least foolishness according to the rubrics of this world and its memory. The path he embraced welcomed trial and obscurity, not fortune or fame. He refused travel and speaking engagements because his vocation, as he saw it, was as a shepherd to an impoverished community in need of his every waking hour, first in Quincy and later in Chicago. And over 100 years later, the direct fruits of his labors seem meager at best. No grand church like the one he envisioned for St. Monica's, no opus of writings for posterity, no celebration in the dusty annals of American Catholicism, his life a mere footnote or a sentence, at best. Indeed, his life, by all accounts, was a failure. Failure to enter an American seminary, failure to thrive in his hometown, failure to establish a lasting community in Chicago. But is not this the failure of the saints, the failure of the cross? For those who succeed in this life are soon forgotten, and those who fail, the church remembers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very much. We now have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and I'm going to start it. Your permission. Well, there's so much there. But actually, I'm very struck by something in your presentation, Celia. You mentioned at the very beginning the seeing through the sort of ways of confrontation and the adversarial competitive game that was, I think you were talking about the law training you'd received. And nearer the end of your presentation, you also put forward, reminded us, called for the need for a reckoning, where the church would take ownership, authentically admit its own agency in racism, and finally get around to real inclusivity at equally empowered chairs at tables of decision making. So I wonder if you could say something about how that's, to those who might say, gee, that sounds confrontational. That sounds rather adversarial to demand so much of a reckoning of the past. Could you disambiguate or clarify those, how such a reckoning is not mere adversarialness? And I think what I can do, if you'd like to come here, you certainly can. Yeah, maybe I'll just yield this because I think the rest of the questions will come from the floor. Thank you.
All right, so I want to make sure I understand the question about the concept of ownership being confrontational. Is that?
Or the reckoning, those who might think the reckoning sounds confrontational.
Yeah, well, I think that it's going to require a breakthrough. And in order for there to be any kind of breakthrough, there has to be ownership. And the reckoning is just owning and acknowledging one's part in the history. Maybe I can give an easy example. In the world of relationships, when you have a breakdown in your ability to get through or communicate, it sometimes takes an ownership on what your part has been and what that breakdown has been. It's a lot more difficult when you're looking at an entire history and you're looking at generations of people and what people have done in the past. But an authentic ownership, maybe it is confrontational, but from where I stand, I believe it is something that is essential. Because when we do it from the place we called comfort, we're not really able to break through. So a reckoning, in essence, is going to take us out of our comfort zone. Ownership is going to take us out of our comfort zone. It's going to challenge us in that place where we always go, our pride and our ego. And I really think if we're going to engage in that Christ-like way of being, we're just going to have to shed some of those things that really keep the barriers in place. So it may be confrontational, but you know what? Sometimes you need to be radical in how you approach a breakthrough in anything, especially dealing with people. I hope that answers that question.
This question is for Ms. Celia. At what point do we move on from apologizing for the sins committed by members of the church to acting as Christ impels us, especially as laity and clergy? My reference is to the example of the Jesuit at Georgetown.
Okay, I'm not sure I fully understood your question.
At what point do we move on from apologizing for the sins committed by members of the church to acting as Christ impels us, especially as laity and clergy? My reference is to the example of the Jesuit at Georgetown.
Yeah. So the whole concept of apologizing sometimes you have an apology that doesn't feel like a real apology. And I think that you don't stop until you're able to get through. And so the atonement that the Jesuits are engaging in isn't the end all be all. I don't think that that's the only answer. That's maybe an answer. But one of the things that I understand that they're attempting to do is to engage in conversation and dialogue around truth and reconciliation. And a lot of times when we talk about truth and reconciliation, if we're not doing it from the place called the heart, if we're doing it for some of those political reasons or we're doing it for other reasons, then it doesn't really get us to the place that we need to be, which is on the other side. So apologies are needed until apologies are fully embraced and understood and accepted. And I don't think we stop until we're able to break through. I hope that answers your question.
We got a question came in. It doesn't specifically address to with your name on it, so I guess it's open for either one of you would like to respond. How does one heal from racial wound, and how does forgiveness play a role in this process?
Yeah, that's what I get when I say something, right? What was the question again?
All right. How does one heal from racial wound, and how does forgiveness play a role in this process?
Well, I mean, that's the impossible question to answer, right? I mean, that's a very challenging question. But of course, my answer would be you can't forgive what you forget. And you can't ask for forgiveness for what you forget. You know, to be quite honest, I thought I knew something about Father Gus before this event, but I really knew nothing. And I'm supposedly an expert in the church's history in the United States. I'd heard of Father Gus, but had I sat down and actually read his biography? No. And pretty much any standard history of the Church in the United States mentions Father Gus, usually, not always, maybe the Healy brothers, but it's a footnote. It's not a major part of the Church's history. The interesting thing about Georgetown, which of course has sort of the luxury of raising money for monetary reparations, more or less, is that the Jesuits, the interesting story. So those of you in American church history on next Tuesday, we're going to talk about this, but we can talk about it right now. The Jesuits got word that Gregory XVI was going to condemn the slave trade. So what do? They sold the slaves before the papal bull was promulgated. That's what they did. Then the superior was recalled to Rome. He did not return for 5 years. But you know, this is something that nobody really talked about until the last 5-10 years. Not even the Jesuits. The Jesuits are committed to social justice. So it's, I think the first step, one of the first steps, is really wrestling with the memory. And it's not just simply to chastise people, but it's to actually own our own history. That's enough for me.
I'll make one comment. Forgiveness, I think a couple examples for the modeling for human forgiveness. One is when Father lay dying at Mercy Hospital in Chicago, he asked his mother to guarantee that they would take his remains back to Quincy to bury them. That was a sign of Father Tolton's forgiveness of all that happened to him in Quincy. The only other image that comes to my mind is the image that we will be commemorating on Good Friday, when Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." That, to me, is the ultimate excuse for most of our wrong behavior as human beings. Most of the time, we don't know what we're doing. It's a narrative, the mysterium iniquitatis, the mystery of iniquity that's embedded into our condition of original sin. So those two images, I think, is how you do it. That one of Tolton, why? Well, they would have buried him in Chicago, but he went back to the crucible of his suffering to be buried, and what people visit his grave every day, practically.
Thank you very much. Join me in thanking our respondents, Celia Jackson and Dr. Paul Monson. We now have a 15-minute break. Those of you online, I think the suggestion would be to just sort of keep your window open, right? Yes, I'm getting thumbs up on that. So 15 minutes, I know that's a bit brief, but refresh and return. We'll have final remarks from the bishop and a last opportunity for a few questions. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. We have our final segment is to allow Bishop Perry to make some concluding remarks or responses to the respondents as he'd like. And then a little bit more time for some questions that we didn't get to yet. And that'll be our day. So Bishop, please.
I did not choose the respondents that came from your institution here. But it was rather marvelous. I found how they really gelled together, and the different perspectives from the legal community and the historical community was all very, very fine, I thought, and a wonderful blend. So I thank you both very, very much for your presentations. Both of the responders had made reference to a couple of the publications. There are several publications out on Father Tolton's life. What is often considered to be the definitive bibliography that Celia referenced, From Slave to Priest, that came out about 1973 from a Franciscan sister who was working at Corpus Christi Parish in Chicago, who did a series of research and put this together. This is the most popular publication on Father Tolton's life. You can get it today by Ignatius Press or the proverbial Amazon.com. They have everything. Dr. Monson was holding this particular publication that we put out about 2 years ago. It's called Augustus Tolton, The Church is the True Liberator. This publication had the purpose of the most latest research on Father Tolton's life that was not available to Sister Hemisath back in the 1970s. There were certain archives that simply were not available to her at that time, one of them being the Vatican archives. But we were able to get into the Vatican archives beginning in 2010. It's amazing what's over there. You ever had a chance to dig in those dusty files and cabinets and pick up dirt that goes back to the 12th century? There's no other place like it on earth outside the tombs of the pharaohs. Dr. Monson referred to Father Cyprian Davis, our primordial Black Catholic historian, the history of Black Catholics. There is a sequel to this because Father Cyprian died before his second volume on this. And so Dr. Cecilia Moore, who was a member of the Historical Commission assigned to the Tolton cause is finishing the work. And Amazon.com as well. So if you wish to delve into anything more deeply in that regard, these publications. We also put out a graphic novel because people kept asking for pictures. The adults, not the kids, were asking for pictures. So we put together a graphic novel, which is a lovely thing that we ship out from my office down in Chicago. It's a co-op amongst myself and two women who are sisters out in Seattle who did the scenes and beautiful color renditions and that, and I helped review the script to make sure it's as accurate as possible. One is a hardcover and one is a soft cover. It's called Augustus Tolton, Boy Slave. Liturgical Publications is publishing it in Chicago. And it's online with our webpage. It can be ordered off our webpage to Tolton, tolton@archchicago.org. At the end of this session, we're going to pray the prayer of consecration for Father Tolton. If you hold that, keep that by you. Where two or three are gathered, the Lord said, maybe we can make it happen here. Okay, any questions or comments or?
Bishop, how do we foster vocations among minorities? Does the lack of acceptance on the part of seminaries at the time of Augustus still impact the diversity we see in vocations today?
I think vocations today, I've never been a vocational director, but I've worked in tandem with our vocational directors down in Chicago, and it occurs to me that today that work is more and more a kind of one-on-one intentional kind of effort. Back when where I came from, the seminaries were quote unquote filled, so to speak. We expected the freshman class to come in with appreciable numbers and no one ever had a second guess about it. Obviously, things have turned around. Young people have far more options today they didn't have when I was a kid. And many vocations today, maybe some of you today, come from backgrounds and environments where there wasn't that traditional support or influence from family members who want to have a priest or a religious sister amongst their family. If anything, people will talk you out of it for a variety of reasons. I don't know if we've ever been in the top 10 professions, but people don't understand our life, our sense of sacrifice, our poverty, our celibacy, our obedience. These are foreign concepts for today, which is much more individualistic than ever before. But vocations are out there. They certainly are. And I think it takes some really exhaustive effort on the part of you and me to notice the spirit in young people. It's a matter of them listening to the whisper of God's voice. There's a lot of noise out there in the culture, and it's drowning out the voice of God for many young people. But if they can somehow put down their cell phones and iPhones and other kinds of internet and all that other kind of stuff that connects people with people in the name of a lot of words, to listen to God's voice, and if their heart is open enough with which to do that, then you have a potential candidate, I think. But it's a different style today in harvesting of vocations. And we have to somehow be representative out of the sense of our own dedication, the sense of our joy, and our satisfaction with what we are doing, the fact that we've given our lives to God and His church. We are tempted to believe most often that no one could possibly be attracted to what we're attracted to. That's our fundamental problem, I think. We don't think anyone in our parishes that would be, and mostly their mothers wouldn't want their sons to be priests. Well, that may be the case, but you have to, again, break through that. Because those vocations are out there, I believe. We just have a different modus operandi for them.
We have a very short and direct question here. What do you think about the Black Lives Matter movement?
I knew that was going to come up. Black Lives Matter is a many-faceted enterprise, if we use that term. Every social agony, every social protest movement has had its mantras or its slogans or its banners that give energy to their cause. We saw it back in the 1960s with the Black Power movement. We saw it in Poland with the Solidarity movement. These are rallying cries that provide power and energy and excitement to get people rallied around a cause. On that level, I think it's all the same, because social protests and a sense of freedom is very unison, regardless of who you are or where you came from. So that much I think is acceptable. Black Lives Matter because it seems we live in a society where not all lives matter, namely Black ones, for reasons that have been listed. Some of them Celia mentioned. Why is this happening to us and only us? Why is this happening to Asians? Why is this happening to Hispanics? Why have we rough on people at our southern borders, kind of thing? I think every group can say their life matters. Mexican lives matter. Vietnamese lives matter. Irish people matter. You know, we can all say that. But for the moment, my God, what's coming on the news, what's happening around the country, you know, in case you haven't heard, don't Black lives matter? There's a question mark there that doesn't always appear after the slogan that elicits or begs for a response. We want to hear, yes, Black lives matter, because all lives matter. And until it seems like Black lives matter, then it's hard to say that all lives matter by reason of what's been going on. Does that make sense? That's how I approach it.
Thank you, Bishop.
Mhm.
What is one practical activity that would suggest to help individual white Catholics to expand the experience of that Pentecostal calling? What is one practical activity that would suggest to help individual white Catholics to expand the experience of that Pentecostal calling?
What particular activity?
That would suggest to help individual white Catholics to expand the experience of that Pentecostal calling.
Pentecost is certainly the template as I see it. We celebrate Pentecost every year in our parishes, but it's not exactly an experience of what Pentecost was. When you read the Acts of the Apostles, you know what happened. It was not just a Jewish experience. It was a very broad, if not Gentile experience, where people with great variety and diversity came together around this Christ event. We are waiting for that event to re-happen for the church in this country. We don't have that right now. I recently spoke with some catechists and teachers, and I said, you know, some of this has to begin from the ground up. You know, you have to take your little kids in the classroom and you have to take their box of crayons. When we were little, you know, there were crayons and then there were crayons. You had the box of crayons and maybe had 10. You had another box that had 20, another box that had 50. That big chunk of crayons, you were really something if you had the king size box of crayons. But from the grassroots of little kids, you have to begin to show them that the black crayons, the brown ones, maybe even the red ones, are just as pretty as the white crayons, or the gold, or the silver, or the yellow. That they should never use a black crayon or a brown one to indicate something that is bad, or something that shouldn't be. It starts there, as simple and as elementary as that. We're waiting for another Pentecost in the church, and we have glimpses of it here and there. They're snapshots, so to speak. We have diocesan events that go on in the church where suddenly, for some people, this is the first visual they've ever had. My God, we have Mexicans in this diocese? We have Filipinos in this diocese? I never knew there were so many. I thought there were only us. Sometimes that's the first glimpse that people have of any of your dioceses for all their variety. How come that can't happen every Sunday? Am I utopian or am I too idealistic in that kind of wonder or dream that cannot be someday for our church? You see it in pockets. This is like Milwaukee, even Chicago. We have parishes that I travel around for confirmation or whatever, and some of them are really marvelous communities for all of their diversity. Our North City quadrant in Chicago that's representative of many Africans and Asians and Pacific Islanders. There are several parishes that are really in the visual. I said, my God, could this be Pentecost? And then there are other communities, other parishes, which are just so isolated. They've never seen or spoken to a person of your complexion before. We have to begin to create it. We have to grasp onto it and use some creativity in getting into the experience of other people who haven't been our experience. There is a south suburb in my vicariate, whose name I will leave unmentioned, who in the early 70s, there were a group of citizens who believed in this very, very much. They wanted to make sure that white flight would not destroy their community. So they arranged things like community dinners, community conversations over certain topics about, these were middle class and upper middle class whites and blacks, African Americans were moving in. The Hispanics were about 2 years on the way. And it went well for about 7 years, this kind of intermingling. And then it suddenly stopped. It broke down. What happened? Well, the public school in town, someone suddenly realized that it was 43% Black. And once that happened, the whites picked up and went out. They moved. And it echoed what I experienced as a kid. In the 1950s, I say my sister and I, we were 2 of 4 African-American kids in this German parish on the southwest side of Chicago. And the strangest thing, we couldn't articulate it. We kids didn't know what was happening. Sometimes we'd come to school and the desk next to us was suddenly empty. The friend we rode our bikes with and so forth and jumped on people's garages and picked their apples and all other kinds of good things that kids do. And these people left. They never left a forwarding address or a telephone number. So we lost our friends. The white flight had begun. And people were picking up their kids and moving. Why? I guess we still ask that question, why? Could have been otherwise. We like to think. How do you break through that? How do you convince people that we don't have to treat each other as interlopers or intruders into our experience, into our space?
This is a question that came from our online audience. What can seminaries and education institutes do through their curriculum to equip priests with the real history of the universal church?
Well, I think you can so within your program, either by way of courses or even speakers like you've done here, I think are very, very helpful to give people a different idea about things, to somehow take what's going on in society today and give it a proper interpretation from a Christian perspective. Catholic notions of social justice. I just can't imagine today going through 4 years of seminary without some kind of a consideration of Catholic social teaching. I must admit, we say all the right things are there in print. It's just a matter of convincing the people who sit in our pews of what's there. To say nothing what's already there in the gospel. You know, so that the priest who gets up on Sunday and wants to reference some of these things, that a third of his congregation will not get up and walk out during the homily. That shouldn't happen. So it's a matter of shaping and having someone to lead curriculum-wise, then experiential-wise in communities and other contexts where you're moving amidst people of variety. You experience them and they experience you. Because we're all beautiful people. We just don't always appreciate that. We fear one another, unfortunately.
How was your vocation fostered in the Archdiocese of Chicago, drawing you to enter the seminary? And how can this same inspiration be encouraged for young African Americans in parishes today?
I don't think my vocation was as dramatic as Saul being knocked off his horse. I went through the normal journey of a young kid of my time in the 1950s. I mean, we went to Catholic school. We were impressed by the nuns and the priests who taught us, ministered to us. I was an altar boy, except in one parish, I was refused to be an altar boy because I was a white parish. I've never forgot that, but that's what happened. But what impressed me most were the nuns and the priests who reminded me that, you know, I might have a vocation, and they sought to get me into a seminary. And I ended up again with the Capuchins, which again was a very nurturing community. And I have very, very pleasant experiences having been with them for high school, in college, and the first year of theology. And then I discerned out from there because I figured that my calling really was to the diocesan priesthood and not necessarily to religious life. But they left their stamp on me, there's no doubt about it. So my vocation was pretty much undramatic that way. They call us lifers, those of us who started the seminary as freshmen in high school. It's the way you did it. If you didn't enter the high school seminary, you considered to have been strange. They called you special or something. You had to catch up and take summer classes in Latin and so forth. And there were guys that did that, the guys who came in out of the war. We had a lot of World War II guys who came in who found their vocation over in Germany or Luxembourg or in Italy or whatever. So they entered the seminary as specials. So that's essentially my story. It's very, very simple.
Excuse me. I don't know if there are any more questions. Is that just one more? Okay, and we'll ask that last question.
Another one from online. How do you get the clergy? How do you get the clergy to speak to white parishioners, to stand up for and with Black parishioners when they see injustice, not just during Black History Month, but also when they are away from the pulpits, in the office, during social time, etc.? And this is an exact quote: teaching them to nip ism in the butt.
That's a good question. I think one of our biggest weaknesses as clergy is to succumb under timidity. And some of the same fears that plagued the church back in Tolton's time, fearing what they would think or what people would think, or losing patronage or benefactions from people for the things we say, is probably our biggest temptation. Most priests want to be approved of by their people. And here and there you find charismatic priests who could care less, who have no second thoughts about throwing out a challenging word to people. But I find the opposite to be more true than not. There are priests in our parishes who never utter a social justice word in their homilies, in all of their priesthood. It seems to me that a portion of the gospel is somehow just pushed aside, especially when it is so predominant in the air that we breathe today. It would be different if life was hunky-dory and harmonious, but it's not quite. So here and there, we have to reference these things. Not in every homily, but here and there, we have to reference these things with people, and we have to lead them on to treat one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. And again, make sure it's just not theory, or in our general intercessions, which say a lot of nice things, but do they correspond to practice? What we sing about and what we say. Thank you.
So before we do the prayer through the intercession of Father Tolton, I just want to take this moment to say thank you. Thank you is such an empty word sometimes, but I want to thank not only our respondents, Dr. Monson, Dr. Jackson, who gave such enlightening responses and very helpful to us to understand a little bit more from a different perspective, but also thank you to you who are here for taking the time to open yourselves up to hear something different and new, to broaden your perspective, to allow God to speak to us in ways that sometimes we're not willing to do. But especially thank you to you, Bishop Perry. As I said earlier, welcome home. Don't stay away. You have opened our eyes. You have touched our hearts. Thank you very much.
If you had that prayer card, in the middle of the prayer, there's a brief pause for you to enter anything you wish to ask Father Tolton to take to the throne of God for. Oh God, we give you thanks for your servant and priest, Father Augustus Tolton, who labored among us in times of contradiction, times that were both beautiful and paradoxical. His ministry helped lay the foundation for a truly Catholic gathering in faith in our time. We stand in the shadow of his ministry. May his life continue to inspire us and imbue us with that confidence and hope that will forge a new evangelization for the church we love. Father in heaven, Father Tolton's suffering service sheds light upon our sorrows. We see them through the prism of your Son's passion and death. If it be your will, O God, glorify your servant, Father Tolton, by granting the favor I now request through his intercession. So that all may know the goodness of this priest, whose memory looms large in the church he loved. Complete what you have begun in us, that we might work for the fulfillment of your kingdom. Not to us the glory, but glory to you, O God, through Jesus Christ, your Son and our Lord. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you are our God, living and reigning forever and ever. Amen. Thank you.